afternoon, everybody. My name's Jonathan Warren. I'm the Chief Executive of independent place think tank Localis, and a very warm welcome to the webinar launch of what is a first for us, Localis's first policy toolkit, Recovery and Renewal on the Kent High Street. In the next hour, we're going to ask a few questions and give some few answers about challenges facing the high street, but principally, how can local government work with businesses, communities, and wider society to enable not just the survival, but the necessary adaptation of our high streets, everything they need in order to diversify and thrive into what we hope is a long-term future. Before we do so, I've got quite a stream of thanks, so if you can bear with me. First and foremost, many thanks to Kent County Council, primarily to David Smith and David Godfrey, and the COVID Renewal Recovery Fund. In our work, we went entirely around the houses within Kent, so many thanks to all the districts we worked with: Canterbury City Council, Dartford Borough Council, Dover District, Folkestone and Hythe, Gravesham, Maidstone, Sevenoaks, Swale, Thanet, Tunbridge, Medway and Ashford. And thank you here for joining us today, Andrew. Sincere thanks also to the Kent and Medway Economic Development Officers and the Kent Chief Planners. Thanks too for our advisory panel who met earlier in the year, convened with us to mark our homework, to give us great advice and guidance going forwards. And from the Localis side, huge thanks to our team of researchers and for putting this all together: Zane Qureshi, Grace Newcomb and Joe Fyans. So that's huge thanks to everyone involved. Now, why we gathered here today? Well, a bit of background. At the end of last year, Kent County Council commissioned Localis to undertake a study really to capture local knowledge and experience from across Kent and Medway, and to combine this local knowledge with wider national learning to develop a toolkit that would enable places across the county to draw from the successes and pioneering experiments of others. Where this leaves us now in policy terms, well, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is now published, and it contains within it new powers to be introduced to tackle the scourge of empty shops, amongst other things. So Localis's policy toolkit offers what we think are complementary local solutions alongside national policy ideas, which could make levelling up on our high streets across Kent a reality. In the light of future challenges facing the high street, and though some of the panelists might be drawing attention to these later, and amid what's a cost of living issue, Kent's local centres have already, we've unearthed, provided excellent and rather inspiring concrete examples of places overcoming whatever their town centres need to, with a sense of determination, optimism and positivity, the very quintessence of pride in place which the Levelling Up agenda seeks to capture. So finally, now our toolkit, Recovery and Renewal on the Kent High Street, gathers many local perspectives on issues facing Kent's town centres. It highlights innovative ideas that have been developed and practiced locally. It presents a number of policy options and outlines some themes for future investigation. I've sent note to colleagues who joining the webinar. If you registered by Eventbrite, we will have sent out a copy of the toolkit to you, and it went across Localis channels earlier. But no, the toolkit's the toolkit. Here is the webinar of the toolkit, and it gives me great pleasure. We've got a very top panel to tease out some of the questions and challenges arising. So we have Matt Baker, Urban Regeneration Specialist, member of the Grimsey Review, LGA advisor. We've got Councillor Roger Goff, leader of Kent County Council. We've got Andrew Osborne, Head of Economic Development at Ashford Borough Council. And finally, Dr. Jackie Mulligan, Director of Shop Appy. So I'll give a bit more details about each speakers before they have a chance. But today's format is very simple and straightforward. We're going to invite the panelists to speak for a few, maybe 5 minutes or so. And when all is done, we'll open up for questions between the panelists and among our many participants today. So first up, it gives me great pleasure to ask Matt Baker, a consummate expert in this. Matt has decades of experience of working with local authorities and other organisations to support high street regeneration. Previously an advisor to a former community secretary, he was also on the team that produced the Grimsey independent reviews into the high street, and is also a senior fellow at the Institute of Place Management, and as a local government association economic growth advisor, Matt's worked all over the country on regen projects and has also led the LGA's first leadership course for high streets for council leaders. And I think that you were saying earlier, Matt, this year you've worked in diverse places, Cornwall, Northampton and Middlesbrough. And next month you're off delivering a 2-day event on the future of levelling up in Warwick University, which sounds a must do. So look, Matt, enough from me. Be very grateful to hear your views of where things stand and your take on what we've delivered in the toolkit.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm also the founder of Rise Associates consultancy, which among other things works with local authorities to drive high street renewal. The high street has been as you all know, a regular fixture and a sort of continuing narrative around economic gloom for some time now. It might be struggling to get a word in edgeways at the moment for obvious reasons, but I guarantee in the next month or so there will be a familiar barrage of stories around closures and the death of the high street. However, I don't want to focus on this, and I'm going to take a bit of a contrary position today. And that's not to minimise the real hardship that's going on in the high street at the moment. And anyone who's read the last Grimsey review will know that we have very strong feelings about the support that's needed to help traders around the country. But I think there's another story that we need to hear a lot more of. And it's one that I've seen quite a bit in my work this year in and around Cornwall, Northampton, Middlesbrough and other places, and more recently Warrington. And that's the birth of a new high street. Over the last 5 to 10 years, we've begun to see a really marked an accelerated decline in the identikit Clonetown High Street. Now, you'll all know what I'm talking about there. That's the one where all the same brands exist on the high street. And it's hard to tell the difference where you are. If you were some years ago parachuted into a random town, you might not have the foggiest idea where you are because all the same shops will be around you. But we are moving away from that now, and that's something that I am quite excited about and I do draw inspiration from, because the opportunity as we move away from that is for a new, richer, a more creative high street landscape to emerge, where towns can recapture a unique sense of identity and place. And I'm beginning to see strong signs of this landscape taking root. To give you a flavour of my experience of this, over the last 12 months, I've been zorbing, abseiling and wassailing. I've searched for minerals in an electric game box in Manchester. I've enjoyed alfresco dining, rooftop dining and secret restaurant dining. I've listened to steel bands, tubas, chalice and didgeridoos. I've joined cyclists to support pedal-powered stages. I've seen congested streets become car-free carnivals. And I've bought callaloo, smoked barracuda and St. Lucian mangoes from street markets. Now, if I had more time, I could go on. And I'm not just referring to somewhere like Brighton here or Covent Garden. These are in lots of ordinary towns and places across the country. But the point I wanted to make is that I think there's a new divide in high street regeneration. And it's those that cling to a 20th century model of high streets being solely about shopping and being able to drive everywhere, and those that recognise a 21st century model is about creating a rich blend of experiences and community to support shopping. I want to finish with 10 quick points that I see as being key to driving high street renewal. And these are, number one, safety. Too many of our high streets are not safe, and the perception or fear of crime is holding back their recovery. And I think in many places this is the hardest thing to crack. And if you crack this, then you're really onto where you've got very strong foundations. Number two, decarbonisation. One of the biggest mistakes of the 20th century was surrendering too much public space to the car. We need to correct that and make our high streets more people friendly. Number three, new anchors. The days when M&S, Debenhams and BHS were the anchors in every town have long gone, and we need new arts, leisure, food and drink and cultural anchors. And we're seeing some really good examples of this emerge. Number four, independence and markets. Councils have spent a fortune chasing big brands. Now they need to learn how to nurture and support thriving independent quarters and great street markets. And again, we're seeing really good practice of this starting to emerge across the country. Number five, community power. In places like Plymouth and Dumfries, we're seeing great examples of community ownership. I'm currently working on a community asset transfer to turn an abandoned train station in Warrington into a restaurant and retail space. And I think we need a lot more of this. Number six, green space. Where I live in Manchester, we've just got our first city centre park in over 100 years, which is incredible, really. But it's long overdue, and there is a real appetite for green space everywhere. Number seven, diversity. It goes without saying, really. Shopping will not be the raison d'etre for high streets in the future, and people want more choice, which leads to number eight, experiences. Surveys show that 70% of millennials would rather spend their money on experiences than material goods. And I think ultimately this is going to dramatically change the face of high streets. Number nine, housing. I've been really impressed with ongoing work to build more communities in high streets and get more people living there. I was in Middlesbrough last week and saw some brilliant work being done there. And this, many places will not succeed unless they get more people living there and build that community and guarantee that footfall. And this has to continue to build momentum. And finally, leadership. And I'll say finally, because it really should underline everything. And I'm really pleased we're seeing new actors take the stage on this front, whether it's mayors, bids, CICs or community improvement districts. We're seeing a lot of fresh thinking, a lot more fresh thinking, and it's sorely needed. So I know that was a quick sort of rattle-stop tour of my thinking. Hope it will kick off some interesting debates, and thank you very much, Jonathan.
Many thanks, Matt, for getting us up to such a strong, solid start, and for your sort of not 10 commandments, but 10 very, very vital ingredients for revival. You ended on leadership, and neatly segueing me in, gives me great pleasure to introduce Councillor Roger Goff, the leader of Kent County Council. Roger's been leader of Kent County Council since October 2019. He sits on the LGA's Children and Young People Board and chairs the South East Strategic Partnership for Migration Board. Roger also has notably a strong record of national politics through work with us, basically, as well as Policy Exchange in your past, Roger. So without any further ado, let me pass on the baton. It'd be great to hear from you, Roger.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome to everyone listening in to this. And firstly, can I say congratulations to Localis. As you say, I have previous with Localis myself, so delighted to see it producing what I think is a great piece of work, and clearly one that reflects our experience in Kent. And I would thank everybody across Kent and Medway who contributed to this, because it has been a great effort and contribution across many different players within the county. And perhaps worth starting by reflecting on the fact that this report was originally commissioned, brought into being in the midst of COVID, which of course seems a little bit yesterday in one sense. It feels a little bit like the last crisis but three. But it was nonetheless an important staging post, and I think perhaps an important staging post in moving away, going back to what Matt was mentioning, that accelerating perhaps that move away from chasing the identikit any town high street. And I think what this report does is very much demonstrate ways in which local actors can try to move away from that, and in particular how in the case of a two-tier area like Kent, that you can have both the strategic role of a county council and very strong local leadership coming together to seek to address this. Going back to, in fact, that sort of approach was very much pioneered within the time of COVID. I think we made a point in Kent at that time of very strong work between the county and both districts, boroughs, and indeed more local communities as well. And one of the things that we did during that time was generate the Economic Renewal and Resilience Plan, which did try to set out, amongst many things, something of a vision about supporting town centres. Just to quote it, given each town's unique offer and set of partners, the drive for this needs to be local. We will support collaboration across districts on funding and sharing of delivery expertise and best practice. And we've continued that more recently as a county council with our recent strategic statement, setting out our plans for the next few years, which again commits us to that path. And as I say, the work that underlies this report is very much driven by economic development and other professionals. I'll come back to this in a moment, across Kent and Medway. 3 quick points that I just wanted to pick out in summary about this. One is this builds on a lot of other work. Indeed, people like Matt and others who have driven this debate across the country. So there's no point in reinventing the wheel, and we don't seek in the report to do so. The second is, I'll say a little bit more about the strategic role, but also the strategic and the very local and how those come together. And then perhaps touch also on some of the most recent announcements we've seen and how those fit together. So on not reinventing the wheel, as I say, whether it's Grimsby, whether it's the whole range of work that's been done by people, many of them much more experienced and better qualified than I in this area, we've seen both examples of good practice, analysis of the dynamics that lie behind what's going on in high streets, and indeed developing a whole range of policy options. And when we set this report out, and when we asked Localis to take this up with a whole series of key questions, it was very much building on that work. There's no point, as I say, in reinventing what there was, but to look at what already existed as best practice, to look at the dynamic developing, as Matt said, about moving away to a different vision of the high street, and then addressing the questions of what role councils can play in this, what some of the developments over the last few years, like permitted development rights, might mean, and how we take it all forward. So that was really the aim in putting together the report. Secondly, as I say, I think one of the big features of this, and we could draw it out a little bit more in discussion, but is the strategic role. You'd expect me to say that as leader of a county council, but it is, I think, both the strategic and the local. So whether it is the public sector as a whole and its use of its estate, we're all of us in the process of making changes to our estate, and how that can contribute to developments in town centres. The role of transport, and you touched, Matt again touched on this a little bit. If we are looking at different visions for town centres, how does, and for high streets, how does a changing transport approach support that? Promotion and coordination, particularly with the emphasis on the visitor economy offer, or creative industries. How do you seek to promote that across a wider community, a wider catchment area? And finally, as I say, the areas in which different parts of local government can work together. I've talked about the work done between economic development officers. Kent Planning Officers Group as well has built a very strong collaboration, which again informed much of the work that was in here. Finally, and sorry, just to touch on the fact that I think one of the points we draw out right at the end is, in terms of governance and that sort of area, is the ways in which you can have both the very local, those very local forms of engagement, which I think make a huge difference. And at the same time, is there a role in terms of county-wide approaches to supporting master planning, not dictating in any sense, but drawing together some of the resources and some of the learning that there's been across the things that different towns across our county are doing. Finally, just to touch on the fact that clearly we've seen a huge range of initiatives launched last week by government, the new government, as they like to bill themselves. I think it's probably very early to be able to say how that will play out. But I think one of the big questions is how far some of the incentives for growth will reach retail and town centres and indeed other elements of town centres quickly enough. And finally, of course, Kent was, as you will have noted, one of the areas approached at speed, it must be said, on the topic of investment zones. I'm not sure I can say much more than the fact that we were approached and we said yes. But clearly, again, there may well be some interesting opportunities in that space playing into some of the issues that are raised in this report. So, Jonathan, I'll leave it there. But again, my thanks very much to Localis and to all our colleagues across the county who I think came together to produce something that I hope makes a real contribution to this debate.
Many thanks indeed, Roger, for putting the spotlight on leadership, which is so integral to this, and from leadership really too. It's very grateful to hear from Andrew Osborne. Andrew is Head of Economic Development at Ashford Borough Council, and I guess responsible for delivery of town centre developments and working with retail providers to ensure, where possible, sustainability in the town centre. I think the Love Ashford team and your works through there to regenerate the town centre, as well as championing investment in ultra-fast broadband, promotion of tourism and art and cultural services. So Andrew, we're very grateful to hear your kind of practitioner viewpoint as to what's been going on the ground in Ashford to add to our store of knowledge this afternoon. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you to the speakers to set the scene, I think. And I'll talk a little bit more about a local Ashford perspective, but I'm conscious districts across Kent doing very similar things. And in fact, actually, some of the stuff I talk about, we pinched off other districts, and I'll try and name drop them as we go. But I think what the element from my presentation and what I wanted to talk about is really about empowering people and communities. I think the critical element for town centres that we need to realise is it's not about property, it's about the people, and it's about the people who want either the experience or the people who want to build and deliver the businesses that, and the areas within our town centres that will make them busy, thriving and attractive places. So I'll try and touch on that a little bit and maybe even pick up some of the themes Matt's talked about in his 10 Commandments as well. So we're all about trying to empower people within Ashford. We know that the local authority only has a limited reach in terms of what it can actually do, and it's about actually then those people within the area that can pick that up and how we can create the right environment for them to thrive. Two of the critical things that we did quite significantly is we bought Park Mall Shopping Centre a number of years ago. And we've worked with independents to actually get independent retailers into that space and to actually then bring a different dynamic to the centre. The things like the Little Teapot, creating a new cafe where the people are local, you're dealing with local people and they're inviting the local people and friends into their cafe to actually then create something that actually brings community and not just about a business. And within that as well, we're very clear, I think it's been running now about 7 years, Made in Ashford is a shop in essence that actually then brings a whole series of crafters and makers together that actually sell their product through one unit. They've been so successful, they now have the craft ship the other side of the Park Mall, which actually then has space for people to go in and craft and actually do workshops and all sorts of other things. So that's about empowering people with a vision as to what they want to do, and actually the group of people behind that is significant. But it's also about making safe spaces. I think this is a key point that Matt made, and probably the key point that Matt made is around safe spaces. So we've been working through the Safer Streets scheme. £500,000 has been spent in Ashford around improved lighting and around improved security around some of our park areas and memorial gardens. But it's also about actually then creating new apps and safe spaces for people. And actually the app then provides safe routes and also safe places for them to go. So it's trying to actually then deal with these issues of antisocial behaviour and the fear of crime within town centres, which I think can be quite a difficult stigma for town centres to break. In addition, we've been working with a business support organisation that delivers across Ashford and Tenterton, our other main town, to actually support businesses. Over 25 businesses are going through that support program to try and actually give them the tools to make them a bit more digitalized, to actually enable them to embrace the online as much as their shop themselves. We did a series of grants as part of the COVID initiative. We had a little bit of spare money, not a lot, left over from the ARG grant scheme, which we then repurposed, basically taking the lead from places like Dover and Folkestone and Hythe, who have already done this and have the forethought around this, for empty shops and shop improvement grants. So we ran a scheme at the beginning of this year, which actually had over 20 businesses embracing that, and we're still seeing the fruits of that with works going on in vacant units that are soon to be open. Some already are open, some soon to be open. So that actually embraces what independent entrepreneurs can actually bring to the high street and actually incentivizes them to come in and deliver that. But I also think it's around events. We hold a series of events across the year that are very community orientated. We had Fabric of Ashford just recently. We've got Create Music Village, which will be 31 musical events in businesses within Ashford Town Centre, embracing the evening economy over the month of October. And that builds on what we used to have is Create, which was actually out in Victoria Park previously. So we brought that back into the town centre and enlivening the town centre with music. We've got Carnival of the Baubles, which is a wonderful procession of light that comes through Ashford in December each year, and it's becoming a real key community event each year. But that also is embraced, I think, by people like Rochester and Chatham. Chatham have done a Lights Festival, or Rochester did a Lights Festival last year, and Chatham are doing it, I think, this year or beginning of next year. So it's actually embracing those sorts of themes and working through those. The other thing that we have more recently done, and I think this probably comes to the other point I was going to make, is that we've just done some work with Mulligan and a series of consultants around the town centre reset for Ashford. That's sort of embraced the fact that we need to have a look at the real core part of our town centre again and look to try and change it. And that's come through to the beginning of the summer. And I think the next point I will say is act quickly and test. So what we have done is, back in May, there was a decision around some parking areas in Bank Street and Middle Row in Ashford Town Centre, where it was suggested where we might want to try and repurpose those as parklets to actually then allow the space to be more green and for people to sit down and to eat and to enjoy and to meet up. And we did that. We've implemented a scheme at the beginning of August, which runs through to the end of October, where we've repurposed those parking spaces right in the town centre for greenery. As part of that, we've done a little bit of work to some vacant units within the area to actually enliven them through window wraps and other things to make sure that they're not a blight. And that really is about sort of trying to give a bit of space back to people and do that. And I think my last point, which hopefully will add to Matt's 10 commandments, if I may, is that of commercial and cultural space. I think, as well as the housing in the right place, for me, in town centres, housing in the wrong place can be create challenges, especially if it's next to evening economy aspects and other things that want to try and embrace that. But housing in the right place is great, but we also need some commercial space coming back into our town centres, hybrid working, maker space, and I think these are the sorts of things Ashford will be looking at moving forward. I was going to leave it there.
Andrew, thank you that you left it perfectly, and many thanks for some great illustrative examples of what you've done, what you've learned from others, and pioneering through and giving us an possible 11th commandment. That is no mean feat. Let's introduce Jackie. Great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jackie Mulligan, CEO of multi-award winning shop appy.com and shop localonline.org, an expert on the High Street Task Force and Senior Fellow of the Institute for Place Management, creator of Love Local Day. Jackie founded Shop Happy back in 2016 as a local shop campaign and a digital platform to browse, book and buy local online. And in March 2020, you introduced home delivery. So Jackie, great pleasure to hear your. We've had 3 previous panelists, Matt, Roger, and Andrew. Please, what's your views on where we are in terms of retail, high streets, town centres? With your hat on behind you, take it away.
I won't put that hat on. Okay, so the first thing is, I mean, obviously COVID proved quite a positive force in some ways for high streets. One of the ways was obviously it forced retail to adapt and digitalise, which was long overdue. So previously, high streets were lagging around 10 years behind and were getting hammered by the online giants. So digitalisation accelerated with COVID. And actually, the digital market is the one that's been least affected, even by the economic challenges we're facing now. The other thing it did was it created more collaboration. And we saw that right across the country. Shop Happy quickly expanded to different towns, but we saw different types of collaboration happening, communities coming together. It sped things up. Long overdue in councils was actually the ability to act quickly. So we talked about business improvement districts, but actually the councils were taking leadership and really focusing on the high street, which again was an area which I always had felt that funding was ignoring the B2C businesses prior to COVID, prior to 2019 really. So that sped things up, and there was a kind of renewed appreciation. What we saw was a renewed appreciation of what people had on their local high streets, because suddenly they had time. They were at home and they could see what they had, and they could moan about what they had, but they could see it and they experienced it. So actually there were some really positive outcomes that came out of that. The corner shop rose in appreciation. And we were left with forever changed working patterns, particularly in the professional sector, more hybrid working, which is always going to be an advantage and a benefit for market towns. I am looking forward to 4-day weeks being something that councils start to implement. And the reason I say that is because there's evidence that these days are more productive, but actually give people more leisure time to enjoy their high streets, and it may well boost the economy. So that 4-day week helped people think of working, and as we've recovered, some has gone back. So for instance, in Shop Happy, we grew and we worked remotely, but now I'm sitting in my office in Salts Mill, and that is a particular place where now the team can actually collaborate, but we don't do it full time. We're not here every day of the week. So we have this homework balance. The resilience was needed. So businesses that adapted, you could see were more resilient. So have we got businesses that want to manage a business? Is it a lifestyle business, or is it an entrepreneur? To some degree, we saw many more entrepreneurs come into the space who saw opportunities. Often there are opportunities in crisis, and entrepreneurs will be the ones to spot them. So the businesses that adapted and also produced side hustles. So we have the concept of the side hustle, and that became more important. So accounts also about giving people more strings to their bow. For instance, an art shop we worked with started to realise that what they were tapping into was mindfulness, and now we have an art shopkeeper who's also a mindfulness coach. So there are ways for people to learn and expand. And what I think it's shown is none of us can rely on one thing. We have to be very, very adaptable. So that adaptable skill set also needs to be something that we're putting into our educational systems too. I had the pleasure of being with the High Street Task Force, so working with many different areas, but also my own with Shop Happy. I've been invited to join boards, and inclusivity has become an increasingly important word. Inclusive economy and community wealth building. So to what extent are we creating frameworks? So Matt says experience, and I agree, but shops are important. You know, in COVID, the corner shop was increasingly important and people want to trade, but it is getting that mix. So independents are definitely on the rise. We've always said, in fact, we said in 2016, small is the new giant. And that's what is happening. It's the small businesses. I just came back from Redcar, where I went to the Thrift Festival, the National Festival of Sustainability, where I bought this beautifully handcrafted hat behind me. But that had 50,000 people or more going and learning about how they could live more environmentally friendly. So another big trend is that eco shift. What I am seeing, though, is policies that aren't necessarily in line with that. If you think of a town centre is an incredibly carbon neutral way to shop, particularly, as Andrew says, if the housing is sensitive. We shouldn't be making people reliant on car journeys in order to get to shops and services. They should be near them, and proximity will be a solution. Also, you're talking about detachment and loneliness. All of us during COVID had the experience of what detachment was like. You speak to elderly people, for example, or people who have disabilities, who are housebound, they're probably facing that every day. So digitalisation, as well as transport access, becomes increasingly important. At the same time, we're seeing transport challenged in different places. Safety has become up and up and up the agenda everywhere you go, every time you talk to town. That, unfortunately, Andrew, I think is going to get worse as there is economic fallout from what is happening to us right now. So unless we can call that, and that isn't about moving the problem on to another town or moving it to another area, you've got to try to prevent this issue occurring. So more preventative. So what I'm seeing currently, unfortunately, is we work with thousands of businesses who are experiencing significant problems with the cost of living crisis. The recent announcements over the last day or two, even for ourselves as a small business, is catastrophic. If you import products or you use software that is US dollars, you are facing 30% rises. The interest rate rise that the Bank of England is threatening right now is plummeting consumer confidence. A few weeks ago, I was on a panel where consumer confidence is now at its lowest ever level at -44. And the Resolution Foundation has said now we are facing the biggest squeeze on living standards that we've seen in the last century. Major problems. And we shouldn't deny it. We have to face up to it. And we have to think, how can we respond to this? How can we be more agile? So that means councils, local authorities are going to have to be quick response. We are in an emergency situation, a growing one. But let's be mindful of not losing track of what people showed us they wanted. During COVID, community, environment, eco, we saw rising issues around ethics, ethical businesses, repair cafes, fantastic initiatives. Businesses, some of the small businesses we're dealing with are changing from private commercial entities into CICs in order to just simply keep going. So there are challenges, but as always on our high streets, there are fantastic ideas that come through. But what we have to do is enable them to enter more easily. And some of that has been in Barnsley. There's Inclusive Economy Board, which is working and creating operational groups. They're tackling the big ugly topics one by one and focusing on getting all the stakeholders together to resolve it. So yes, we can paint things and say it is great and there are great initiatives coming, which there are in Kent and in lots of other places. There are green shoots everywhere. But please let's not deny that right now there is a major challenge, and actually it looks worse than COVID. So what are we going to do now? What are the actions we need to do now as leaders to help our businesses get through this, give them the resilience? They're going to need many side hustles. They're going to need to be agile. You're going to need to focus on value. You're going to need to tackle the crime or antisocial behaviour or petty crime, particularly increasing, that will happen when people can't afford to eat or heat their houses. So at the moment, I just think it's a very complex picture, but from what we saw during COVID and what we learned during COVID, now is the time to really champion that learning, and let's get quicker at responding to crisis.
Many thanks indeed, Jackie. Many thanks to all our panelists, Matt, Roger, Andrew. Now we've got 20 minutes or so, just over 20 minutes to put the questions to be put in the Q&A box, and for us to debate some of the main issues we've been talking around today, primarily around the role of local councils, their ability to adapt, to respond for the sake of town centre renewal and recovery into the future. I don't know how to very rich set of policy options, 10 commandments, then more, looking at the key aspects of transport, decarbonisation and diversity. But no, really, throw it open to our webinar audience. Were there any sort of concrete examples or any broader points you think we need worthy to address here? And if the answer is no, we get off to lunch early. But I do see some names amongst here, not all shrinking violets. And it's on Civic Voice. Question to the panel, and for Jackie to respond to first. Hearing Jackie talk about the urgency to act, do we feel confident that councils, local authorities can respond quickly enough to the challenges facing the high street? Is there an ability to respond quickly enough? Jackie, you first, please.
I think there is, if we can go back to emergency response groups that were created, particularly during COVID within councils. Things have slowed up significantly, I think, in many places. Probably, rightfully, because you can't always operate in crisis and make snap decisions. But I love the kind of test concepts that I think Andrew mentioned about testing ideas and having that ability to, you either succeed or you learn from that test. And we need more testing right now, because it's a very odd market situation. I mean, we do have the privilege of talking to thousands of businesses, and they cry out for all sorts of different support, depending on which one you talk to, particularly the non-food. Anybody who's in non-food right now is going to really struggle. So the response, whether it's working groups, they could be quick at responding, but it's also issues around funding. One of the problems I think that slows councils up is that there are big funding announcements, Levelling Up, Shared Prosperity Fund, Towns Fund, etc. So the council puts a significant resource into actually creating those funding bids to, hopefully win. But actually, it would be great if there was just a constant funding pot, like there used to be lottery awards for all. I used to work in lottery, where, when an opportunity comes up, you go for it. It stops the opportunism and the competitiveness that happens, that sometimes makes strategy fall by the wayside, or even strategy to become invented on the spot. So I think if there was more of a sort of pool of funding to help high streets, we know, don't we? Everybody on this call knows that town centres, high streets, are a barometer of the health of your community. So you have to fix that, because it fixes a lot of other things afterwards. So it strikes me that there should be a consistent fund that's available for councils to reach out to make quick experimental tests. 5-10 grand, not too much, but enough to make a little difference if somebody's got a great idea in their community.
Many thanks, Jackie. Let's put it out to the rest of the panel. Can I ask to put out to Matt, then Andrew, then Roger?
Well, I'm a big fan of local government, but I'm not totally confident that local authorities will be able to respond to some of the challenges Jackie highlighted as nimbly and quickly as they will have to. I mean, we did see in COVID, there were a number of funds which were very slow to distribute. I work with some councils which, a long time after these funds were set up, they were still struggling to give grants and support to businesses. I'm sure Jackie's got experience of that and knows not all councils were great at that. I also think not all. One of the reasons I welcome new sort of actors and leaders in this sphere is I don't think all councils understand some of the realities of the high street. I mean, one of the areas I specialise in is around consultation, and we do a lot of work talking to people on high streets, and that's why I know, for example, that safety is such an issue. I've heard it from all over the country, particularly among women. And for those councils who are trying to develop evening economy strategies, it's very hard when people just will not go out after 6 o'clock because they rightly or wrongly, they perceive that there is a threat to their safety and there's a real fear of crime. And I've gone into places and spoke to people and found out real issues around the high street which the council were not aware about. There was one local authority where we saw a whole sort of drug dealing operation run through a market, and the drugs were being stalled in the kind of the eaves of the market stalls, and the council and the police were not aware of that because the security cameras weren't working. So, there really needs to be a much more a better understanding. Where I'm encouraged though is that I do feel that the high street lobby is stronger now, and I would like to I would hope that in the coming months that those voices, particularly amongst independents, will be heard quite loudly. People like Jackie do a very good job on this, really getting across some of those concerns, because I think sometimes government is guilty of showing a bit of a tin ear to some of this, and they need to recognise, particularly from a sort of electoral point of view, how important the high street is. So I hope those concerns will be heard loud and clear. Just on the point of funds, some of those funds, yes, it is disappointing that I've seen some very good bids that haven't won money, and I hear what Jackie's saying. I think every high street should have a long-term plan. I think that was a recommendation of one of the select committees last year. They do need to focus much more on long-term planning now, and I think they should be funded to do that.
Many thanks, Matt. Andrew, then Roger, is there enough wherewithal to move quickly enough to respond to changing events and circumstances?
Would you like me to go first?
Yes, please, Andrew.
I think there's some great ideas. I think there's some good people within local authorities. I think UK Shared Prosperity Fund provides, okay, maybe not a long term, but at least it gives us a couple of years of funding that actually a lot of authorities are prioritising around town centres. Will it be enough funding and support? The question, I think you could probably never have enough funding and support for town centres. I've worked in them for 25 years, and local authorities are always asking for more, but it provides at least a platform for teams to actually then start scaling up. I think the critical element is around leadership. Certainly where I see in Ashford, there's a strong leadership around our town centre, around what we need, driving the importance of it politically and from an officer perspective locally, which is really encouraging. And with it means we've got a team of a few people that can concentrate on this. I mean, I think in bid areas as well, there's some bids out there that can actually take good leadership alongside the business communities as they sort of step forward and take on the next steps. I do think, though, that there is a bit of a challenge in the structure and how we're working that changes. There's a bit of a change around with the allocation of funding from local down to lower tier authorities, and we need to make sure we keep Kent County Council on board with this, and we make sure that they're involved with the evolution of our town centres, very much so because they are certainly from a highways perspective, but also as the broad remit of activities that they get involved with. So I think it's very much getting the counties and where there's a two-tier system, getting the counties and the districts together. I do worry that whether there's the resource sometimes within local authorities to be able to actually pick this up. I was buoyed by COVID. I think me and the team in Ashford, and I think a lot of my colleagues around the county took a slightly different risk approach sometimes to things, and actually just got on and did things. The ACT, first test, do things that are temporary rather than necessarily trying to build something that's big and permanent. And I think that's a sort of approach that gives me hope that actually local authorities, if they take that mantle on moving forward, can start to do some good stuff. But it's wider than the local authorities. Business rates and the fact that we've got rate relief for quite a lot of town centre retail and hospitality businesses at the moment because of the legacy of COVID. But that won't continue indefinitely, and certainly we've got it for this year, but will we have it for next year and moving forward? So businesses will find it more difficult. Some of those elements that are centrally set by government will need to be dealt with, as well as what local authorities can do on the ground.
Many thanks, Andrew. Same question to Roger, please.
Thank you. I think the other panelists have covered off an awful lot, so I'll be quite brief. I think one positive, two areas of concern. The positive is, just picking up on Andrew mentioned a moment ago, I think in spite of some of the concerns about distribution of certain funds, local authorities and others did learn to move a lot faster, not just actually in this policy area, across a whole range of policy areas in the course of the pandemic. The things that we'd spent years sucking our teeth about and losing years of our lives over suddenly disappeared because you just had to get on with it. I think it's a constant struggle to keep that spirit as you come closer to business as usual. But it is nonetheless, I think there is some legacy from that. The two areas of concern, again, have been mentioned already. Resource, it is mentioned actually in the report.
Mm-hmm.
The question of when local authorities are coming under the kind of pressures that we heard from the famous Barnett graph of doom, some of the capacity to act in this space can get weakened. And I think the Localis report touches on that. And yeah, I agree with Jackie. And it's a point which, to be fair, government themselves recognised, even if they haven't always necessarily acted fully on it. Certainly recognised at the time of the Levelling Up white paper that penny piece sources of funding to which you devote large amounts of your effort and resource to bid for can be a problem. So I think there is the ability there. I think the culture has shifted somewhat, but it will be in the face of a number of headwinds.
Many thanks, Roger, for completing that. Was now we've got flurry of questions in here, so I'm going to ask, let's answer them as quickly as we can to get as many as we can in the 10 minutes left. First question, well, two questions really about creative and cultural sides. Brian Horton asks, how can we ensure cultural-led regeneration in towns like Margate benefits the wider community as well as the creative community? And friend of Localis, Samir Begin, asks, what can be done in policy terms to encourage cultural and creative industries on the high street? And Matt, you're up first.
Okay, really quickly, the answer to the first one is to do better consultation. When cultural regeneration projects, particularly if there's public funding involved in there, you really need to do widespread consultation to ensure that there is something for everyone. And local people's voices do need to be heard. I mean, there's some good examples of that all over the country. I mean, where we are, the Lowry Theatre, which is, part of the sort of media city development in Salford. I think that's a fantastic asset for the local community of Salford, Manchester and beyond, and it really has something for everyone. On the second one, a question about policy to support cultural-led regeneration. I think, more of a focus on events teams. Councils have to realise, particularly on high streets, that, you need to do more events than a bonfire night or a Christmas lights switch on. There has to be stuff going on all the time. There's some really good events. Working with landlords to facilitate pop-ups and those flexible spaces where local artists can try out ideas. If there's initiatives in Oxfordshire, such as the Meanwhile Space Initiative, I think the Let put in £1 million so that landlords were giving out space pop-ups for free, and there's some really good stuff there. I'd also suggest things like community asset transfers, explore the use of abandoned buildings. Can they be taken over to be run by parish or town councils for arts or theatre or performing space? And the same with the community ownership fund. Really try and work with groups such as CICs, etc., to put in bids to run spaces for creative purposes. Because I said in my presentation, I think we need to see more anchors, and I would like to see arts and cultural space fulfil that role. And there are some good places. I think there's a town council in Fleet, I think in Hampshire, which runs its own community theatre. Very good, really good stuff, and like to see that replicated.
Many thanks, Matt. Anyone else from the panel want to take this on? Jackie, very quickly. I'm
just going to take a bit of a opposition to Matt, tiny bit there. Just that I don't think every cultural thing needs a consultation, because when you look at the most amazing festivals and events that have come forward, it's usually some crazy idea person that has championed it and just gone ahead and done it. And actually that's produced some of the most exciting things, and then it creates controversy and debate and discussion, but it actually moves things forward. So I think we've just got to, I'm tempering your consultation thing, because I think it's not, again, it prolongs things, and actually we need experience. The other thing I would say as well is that events don't have to be that expensive. So in terms of events, there was a great guy I talked to in Kingston upon Thames who basically said, I bought a bunch of plastic dinosaurs, I put them outside people's doorways, at shop doorways and told all the families there's a dinosaur safari in the town centre, and people came out dressed up in safari gear and walked around. It cost him £1.50. So actually it's about imagination and creativity. So the other thing around those pop-up spaces, flexible spaces, look at examples like Souk, where you have spaces which are no longer rented by square footage but rented by time, and then you have a daytime evening kind of solution. So and the cultural side, what really strikes me, again, I was doing some consultations with the High Street Task Force, and there'd be events and the businesses would be going, oh no, these events have taken away our trade, because obviously if you have an event it can displace the economic impact. So then what are the businesses, how are you engaging the businesses to do something with the events, whether it's showcasing bits, being part of the exhibition or whatever in the run-up? And I think that's that question about Margate and how do we get these things together is get the business community, give them some of the creative ideas, because right now they're up against it, to say, well, could we display something in the window and it'll draw footfall? No, they should jump at it if you're giving them the solution. So yeah, I think there's lots of ways to bring culture together. I used to lecture in events management, but I think there's many opportunities consistently missed with this great potential.
Lovely, lovely. We've got inside the last 5 minutes to Andrew or Roger, if you want to come in on this particular one, yes or no?
Just very briefly, draw attention again to what we say in the report about skills in that context, because there's quite a lot that could be done in that space to reinforce the spillover effect, as Brian was saying, around what you get from the cultural offer.
Lovely. Okay, a few more questions.
I was just going to say, Jonathan, it's about the people. I think people have said it already. It's about the people. You've got to find those people, inspirational people within your community, the doers that actually can get on and get out there and do it. And if the local authority can find them, then empower them. That's what I would say.
Lovely. Many thanks, Andrew. Well, I'm going to wrap up very soon. As like question of sport, there are more questions than answers. Before I wrap up, and Keith Grimley asks if there are any best examples of agile, practical partnerships between civic, community and business stakeholders worth noting about. And Richard Wakeford, from who chairs a forum for markets in Gloucestershire, asked about what we can do to save the market from the move from commercial to residential. Any quick thoughts or views on those two issues? Matt?
Just quickly to Keith's question, the community improvement districts in Scotland are doing some amazing work. There's one, I think, in Postle Park around Glasgow. And this was an area which really struggled to have a Christmas. I say that because every time they put up a Christmas tree, it was vandalized or burnt down. And the SID there had a different sort of leadership model, working with kind of police, social housing, doctors, etc. They went round estates and asked everyone for a memory of someone who died from drugs or knife crime. And they created these they got a Christmas tree, which was donated by a local businessman. And they put these kind of baubles on, which were, in memoriam, really, for remembering people who'd lost their life in the area to drugs and knife crime. That tree became something of a shrine. No one touched it. All the independents had a really good Christmas. I think something like 3,000 people descended on the town, and it was really successful. And that was a partnership with different kind of leaders. It was, as I said, social housing, GPs, police. I have to say, some of the work I've done, some of the most insightful stuff I've seen around high streets, particularly on cultural-led regeneration, which I should have said earlier, is from the police. So I think there are some really good partnerships to be had, and it's not necessarily the usual suspects.
Many thanks. Matt, any final thoughts from our panelists on either of them? Well, in which case, we're down to the final minute, and we did promise we would end on time for everyone. So look, I'm very aware, as ever, more questions than answers. And David Smith makes the very good point. The Localis Toolkit is a great source of good ideas. Here. How do you think we should continue sharing examples of what works well and what to avoid? David, I'm not sure what exactly the answer to that is, but I certainly think a continued forum for exchange of views, best practice, ideas and examples of what's working on the ground might be a way of doing it. We could do it in person. We could do it via webinar. We could consider updating the toolkit. So I think that we can keep the conversation alive with friends from across Kent and the economic development teams, we're very much happy to do so. On which bombshell, I'm going to express our sincere thanks to our great lineup from the panelists. Huge thanks to Matt Baker, to Councillor Roger Goff, leader of Kent, Andrew Osborne, head of economic development for Ashford Borough Council, and a huge thanks to Dr. Jackie Mulligan from Shop Appy. I thought we had a very lively exchange, great ideas and practical examples were shared, and I will bid everyone farewell. But on